All right, hey guys, welcome back to the Melanin Margin. I'm your host, Quaviondre Williams.
And I'm Daquon Wilson.
And this is the talk show dedicated to bringing the marginalized to the spotlight and uplift the Black voices that will no longer stay silent. But before we get into this week's topic, we want to take a moment and take a pause to talk about what happened in Atlanta and the Asian discrimination that is going on in America right now. It is ridiculous, it is disgusting, and 9 people lost their lives due to Asian discrimination. Specifically, please forgive me if I say their names wrong, but I want to speak them out into existence right here to give it power to say their names. So it's Dayo Fang, Paul Andre Michaels, Zhao Jing Tan, Delani Ashley Yan, Haiwan J. Grant, Sucha Kim, Soon Si Park, and Young AU. Now, what we want to say here, and we want everybody to know, is that Black Lives Matter is about all marginalized people that are affected by white supremacy. And that includes Asian lives. If you are a Black person and you are saying Black Lives Matter and you are saying stand in solidarity, you need to make sure you stand in solidarity with all marginalized people, Pacific Islanders, Indian Americans, Native Americans, everybody is included. When we say Black Lives Matter, we mean all marginalized people because we are all fighting against white supremacy, and that's on period.
That's it.
Daquon?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that, being at college in Atlanta, this was an event that was very shaking to the entire university. And it's one of those times where we really need to be able to, not only stand in solidarity, but check ourselves and reflect on not only how do we perpetuate some of this anti-Asian rhetoric, especially with everything that's happened with the coronavirus and people calling it the Chinese virus or kung flu. And there has been such an increase in anti-Asian violence that has happened since the coronavirus pandemic has started. So it's really important in these moments that we all are together in solidarity and we're all doing the work to fight white supremacy.
And it's crazy to me that we have to keep having these conversations and people keep trying to undo or try to negate what actually happened, because you would oftentimes see, typically when people talk about the person who committed the crime, who committed the hate crime, they say that, they were a massage parlor workers and blah, blah. And I'm kind of, I don't give a fuck what they did or what they were doing. The fact remains that this was a hate crime. We're not going to sit there and victim shame or victim blame or whatever the fuck that is, where you're going to sit there and try to diminish what it actually was, because that's what we see oftentimes. As Black people, we always get hurt where they were being aggressive, they were being whatever. So now you're telling me that because they were massage workers or whatever the fuck you want to call it, that makes them less than, or that makes their life less than? Fuck out of here with that bullshit. That's what I say about that. That's what I say about that. What we're not going to do is perpetuate Asian discrimination. That's what we're not going to do. As Black people, we stand with Asian people. We stand with Native American, Indian people, any person who is affected by white supremacy, because we are all in here together. We all fighting the same fight. And the only way that we are going to win is if we understand that this is not just a fight against Black. It's not just a fight against Asian. It's not just a fight against Indian. It's a fight against white supremacy as a whole. So let's get into this week's race conversation. Black people and intergenerational trauma. So, Quan, I want to ask you, do you feel that there are certain aspects of Black parenting that are problematic?
Ooh, this is a topic right here because, every Black person, I don't want to say every, because, Black people aren't a monolith. Yeah. But in my experience, it's been pretty common that, as Black people, we are hesitant to ever, call out our parenting methods or how our parents raised us or try to call any of that problematic. But I think that, as I've grown as a person, as I've grown as an intellectual, somebody, coming into myself, I have the ability and I have the space and capability to really reflect on certain practices and experience. And I do think that there are very problematic practices within the Black community in terms of how we, parent or how we kind of treat things like discipline and, what respect means.
Absolutely. I fully agree. I think there is definitely a problem that we don't want to discuss because as Black people, we tend to hide more as far as like what happens within the home, because it's almost seen as disrespectful to speak out about the problematic upbringings that we do have, because it's almost it's a way up to protect ourselves, because in history has proven that when Black people speak up about problematic things, we've always been hit, beat, whipped, stuff like that. So those punishments that we endured in that past has kind of slowly like put itself into the Black culture, put itself into Black people, so that we teach our children that you don't talk about what happens in the house. You never talk about the problems that happen inside. It's all about what's going on here, not what's going on out there. We don't discuss that at all. And I think that that's a problem, because even with this topic that we're bringing up, it's still that level of fear of like bringing it up, because you feel like it's almost a sign of, disloyalty to your community to bring up the problems. There's this kind of little bit of fear you have, is like, is questioning Black parenting against anti-Black, almost, in a way. You get that kind of fear, and of course it's not, but these are the fears that have been ingrained in us. That's what I was looking for, ingrained in us from the years of slavery and feeling less than and stuff like that and all that. It's become so ingrained in our culture that this trauma has been perpetuated generationally over and over and over again. And it's shifted, but it still remains. Even though it's not the same, exact trauma, it's manifesting in different ways, if that makes any sense. I want to ask you, do you know any, specifically for you, do you know any specific things or parenting styles that you were like, that,
yeah,
for that particular phrase or something like that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that, I think about in terms of Black parenting styles or phrases that I've heard, not necessarily from my parents, but from Black parents, have been like things like, "Oh, I'm beating you because I love you." And to me,
oh my God,
to me, that is such a weighted, phrase, because it kind of brings up this thought of like, like you were saying about how things have been rooted in slavery, and like this idea that I am going to beat you so the master doesn't, because if the master does it, he's not going to care. And I think that that's one of the things that is so problematic, is that we are kind of ingraining within ourselves that we have to be always the ones to correct ourselves to fit this standard of white supremacy. It's one of those things that white supremacy is so ingrained in our society, it's so ingrained in our personhood, that it even is reflected in how we parent and how we discipline our children.
Absolutely, I fully agree. I think that when it comes to a lot of things that I've noticed, specifically phrases like "because I said so," and you don't question me, you don't talk back, you don't whatever. And I think that oftentimes for me, specifically in my household, my parents would oftentimes compare what they allow me to do privilege-wise to what they were not able to do in the past. And it would oftentimes seem like, well, look at what I'm allowing you to do now. Well, I didn't get that opportunity. I didn't do that. And it's almost kind of like an affront, like an attack almost, it feels, when you say, well, Mom, I'm telling you about this, or Dad, I'm telling you about this. I'm kind of like, well, I didn't get a chance to voice my opinion. I just had to do what I did. And I'm kind of like, but that wasn't okay. Like, it wasn't okay then, and it's not okay now. You know what I mean? And I think that it's really crazy, because when it feels like, I told you, when we question the idea that we can't question our parents in their judgment, especially in this community, it's just like the fact that you feel disrespectful, or it feels like disrespect to question something that you don't understand.
Right.
If that goes back to what you were saying about that slavery thing, because if you question the master, you get beaten. If you question what you had to do, you get beaten. If you even made so much of as a like, I don't believe this is right, you could be the threat of your death. You see what I'm saying? So like I said, I understand where it comes from, but it doesn't mean that it's the manifestation of it still in our present day is any better, because if we don't question those in charge, then when something bad does happen to us, when it's not our parents or whatever the case may be, those same ideas will remain in situations where it doesn't happen. Like specifically, I want to kind of bring up this a little bit. That was kind of like how my mom was growing up, and very much so, like, you know, don't question what I say, or what I say goes kind of thing. And we would oftentimes get in a lot of like, it was a lot of this growing up, because I was always like, Mom, I don't think that's right, or Mom, I don't think whatever is in it. We'd always get a lot of arguments. But the reality is, though, having that opportunity to have those discussions about what I didn't feel, or where I felt wronged, or I felt whatever in that situation, when I got into the real world and I was seeing people treating me differently, or people disrespecting me, or people not making me not feel, or whatever, I was able to question it. I was able to stand up for myself and say, hey, that's not okay. You know what I mean? And once again, I'm not saying my mom was like abusive or nothing like that, but I'm just saying, like, when you tell your child, especially in those situations, when you tell your child not to question your authority, or not to ask, or not to say, Mom, I felt kind of bad because you said blank, blank, and blank. This is how this made me feel. It holds your children back from the idea of understanding that they can question when things are not going well, or when things are not feeling well, when things are serious. Yeah, it might not be as serious to you in that situation, but in another situation, if you tell your child that they can't question you, they can't question authority figures, then when something actually does happen, where it's actually an affront to their, it's an injustice but put on them, they won't feel the need to speak up. Am I making sense here, Daquon?
Yeah, totally. I think something that you're getting at is like this period of life that is adolescence is one of the most formative periods of your entire life. Like even like biologically, when your brain is forming and kind of being conditioned and being socialized to do certain things. When you're told, oh, you can't question authority, you can't have these discussions with me because I tell you what to do and you just have to listen and deal with it.
Yeah.
We're stripped from that ability to have discussions, to have conversations, to be able to stick up for ourselves when it comes time to be like, hey, like, this is something that is not right. This is something that is not okay. Here is how I feel in this situation. And I think it causes us to suppress our emotions because at the end of the day, if we express anything that other than like contentment, then it's a
Yes.
problem. If we're angry, then it's like you better stop being angry before I give you something to be angry about. If
Yeah.
you're sad, it's like you better stop being sad before I give you something to be sad about. And it's
Conditioning.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's one of these things that is so ingrained in our society. And like you were saying before, talking about how, oh, these are things that I was never afforded. So like I'm being nice. And I think that this kind of trauma is becoming such an intergenerational thing. And I was wondering, like, have you ever seen some of these effects of this intergenerational trauma, or have you ever felt it personally?
Yes, absolutely. I think that I felt a lot of that, is specifically of, there's this phrase that is very impactful, but it's also kind of problematic in some ways. And it's the, you have to work twice as hard as a Black person to achieve half as much as a white person. And I'm paraphrasing, of course, that's not the actual direct quote. And I felt a lot of that pressure as a kid. My mom is was very big on me and my sister about getting good grades and making sure we brought home A's. Like that's what was required. You bring home A's and B's, period. And when I was younger, when I would make lower grades, it would not be a good reaction from my mother. I'll just say that much. And growing up with that kind of upbringing, once again, I understand why she did it. I want to be clear. I understand why she was that way. It helped me become a successful person. It helped me, take my grades seriously, take my education seriously. But it was also problematic in the sense that it made me feel that any kind of failure was a problem. Any kind of failure was weakness. Any kind of failure meant that you weren't good enough. Now, that's not what my mom did to me or said to me, but these are the things that I thought of myself. I became a perfectionist. It's like if I could not, I remember this very distinct memory of, you know, making a D in a class and like bawling tears when my mom picked me because I was so scared of telling her that I made a D in a class because I just didn't understand whatever was going on. And, you know, she's like, oh my God, like, you know, it's okay, whatever. But I was just like breaking down. Like I was so scared because I was like, I didn't mean to, like, I just, whatever. Like it was that kind of fear of failure that has, you know, and as an adult, we understand that failure is a part of life. You know, failure helps us learn, it helps us grow. You know, it's maybe you didn't get it right then, but you'll get it in the future. But in the Black community, I want to ask you this too, because you were very successful. I mean, bitch, smart as fuck. Like, bitch was second. Wasn't that second in class? Wasn't it second in class? If I'm not mistaken. Third, but still, bitch. But still. And I want to ask you the same thing. Like, did you ever feel this idea of this super pressure to be the best?
Yeah, 100%. It was one of those things that, you know, I remember, you know, classes and everything, and I got like a 90. And, you know, South Carolina, this was back when we had the 7-point scale. So a 90 was a B.
Yeah.
And it was a moment where like one of my parents said, oh, why do you have a B? Why don't you have an A? And I don't think they like meant something super serious by it. But like, I remember in that moment, it's just like, oh, a B is not enough. I need an A to like do what I need to do. And like you, I became a lot more perfectionist. I had that perfectionist mindset. And it's something that like carried on even until college, of just like always having to strive and always having to do more and more, like even beyond just grades. Like I'm very active. Like I remember last year, there was a time when on top of like my courses, I was in like 5 different extracurriculars, had like 4 to 5 exec board positions in those extracurriculars, had like 2 jobs. Like I was doing so much and literally like running myself into the ground because I felt like I had to do that. I felt like I had to do every single thing possible just so I have that chance of success. And I also think that I had that pressure of just like being able to go to Emory, being able to go to a top 20 university. I had that pressure of kind of breaking out of this intergenerational trauma, breaking out of this cycle of just like not being able to like fully achieve your full potential. So I want to kick that back over to you. And have you ever felt like you had to break these chains of intergenerational trauma?
I absolutely 100%. I think that it's this pressure that comes from just, you know, your parents are so big about making you better than what they were, giving you better than what they had. And, you know, like I said, I appreciate the things that my mom has done for me and the way that she has raised me, you know, because no parent's perfect, you know, and they're going to make mistakes. But my mom made sure we were good, you know, and there's this pressure to try to break these chains, specifically going back to what we're talking about, what you asked me about, the feelings of the pressure and stuff like that. It's like all of that stuff comes from what they had in their life, in a generation that they came from, and my mom realizing that it was hard for her to focus on her work because and then she had a kid and something for whatever, you know. So it was a lot of that going on. So it was kind of like that trauma of not being able to achieve everything that she wanted to. I mean, she's doing that and she's doing it, but I'm saying at that particular moment, because she had me when she was young. So not being able to fully achieve everything at that time for herself, and on the fact that she would see so many people in our community, especially Black boys and Black kids or whatever the case may be, you know, not doing as well. She was so adamant about me and my sister doing well. We had to do well because it was no other option. Failure was not an option. And there's that idea of breaking the generational curse, you know, not being or not suffering the same struggles in school, the same whatever's in school as my parents did. And once again, this pressure, I understand where it comes from, and I understand that we're trying to break those chains of trauma. And the way that I'm trying to do that is by trying to pull myself out, because, you know, I suffer with imposter syndrome a lot. You know, especially having been raised the way I was and having been the perfectionist that I had to be because I had to make A's. It's like, it was always this fear of like, this is the day they're going to find out that I'm not actually good. I'm not actually going to get the good grade, or people are not going to actually like me. And I suffer with it so badly to the point where it's like I said before, it's this shame of like, even when I do get something, it's like, all right, but the next thing, I have to do something else. I got to do something else to make for it because I don't know when it'll go away. I don't know when it'll go away. So it's this shame, this consistent shame that follows me that I'm trying so hard to break free of and understand that I can not do well and that's okay, and not let that be such a massive depressive thing on me. You know what I mean? And I think that it's really hard to break free of that trauma because it's once again, it's so ingrained in our culture, so ingrained in my mom's parenting style and whatever. So all I know is that what I did was, my sister, I remember this, when she made a bad grade in something, and I was kind of like, listen, that does not mean you're stupid. That does not mean you're dumb. That does not mean you're not able to do it. What that means is right now, that didn't work. Not yet, but you will get there. Just get your help. See what you did wrong this time. Try to find ways to see where you made errors in and correct those errors moving forward. You can't do nothing about that effort at that point, but you can do something about the moving forward. I remember one time specifically in my abnormal psychology class, I made a 30 something on a test. It was just one of those ones that just fucked me up. And I made I think it was like a 40 or a 30. And I was like, oh my God, like I don't fail this test. Like I'm shit. I'm not nothing. I'm whatever. Like they found me out. The imposter syndrome I'm telling you about. They figured it out. You know, I'm not actually smart, or I'm not actually whatever. And I was like, no, I can't do anything about this F. There is no redoing this test right now, at least at the time. And I was like, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the fact that I have 5 more tests left. I'm going to do my best on these tests so that F doesn't matter. I know that I made mistakes in that test, and I know what mistakes I made. So moving forward, I know how to adjust my studying strategies and adjust my studying habits and adjust how I read the information, take in the information, so that I'm able to take this test moving forward and pass it. Now I'm gonna pass it back to you. Have you ever felt, how did you break free of those chains, or are you still feel chained?
I think for me, it's one of those things that I just had to kind of sit with myself and just like be more in tune with how I feel. You know, being able to express my emotions and understand how I feel in a certain moment has helped me to break those chains. Because similarly, I've had such a imposter syndrome around here, and it's just like, oh, I failed this. They're finding out I don't deserve to be here. I'm the diversity pig, something like that. And it's, in reality, you just have to tell yourself, like, you know, I got here for a reason. I'm
Yes.
here because somebody saw something in me, and I need to be able to see that in myself.
Yes.
And it's one of those growing moments where you have to be like, you know what? I am not going to let a grade define me. I am not going to let my performance define me. And
Yeah.
it's one of those things that it's so ingrained in our society because of capitalism and white supremacy and all of that. But we have to be able to kind of take a minute. And that's why I think, like, as terrible as the pandemic has been for my mental health, it's also been a great asset to like finally have the time to just like sit and like have nothing to actually do, nowhere to be because everything's online. I can like sit here and think and like really think about how I'm feeling in a moment and think about what is who I am.
I fully agree. I want to touch back on what you were saying about that. The pandemic, it's, as perfectionists, or as people who are, you know, very, very much so into that, like the imposter syndrome thing, you almost feel shameful of taking a break.
That right there.
Like you feel like shit when you don't do anything, and you're like, I know I can't push myself this hard, but you're always fighting. And it's like, it's this, once again, it comes from that idea that, you know, Black people have to work twice as hard to get half as much. And it is true. That is true that it's unfortunately, that's our society. But to some extent, we have to understand that yes, we have to work twice as hard, but we also have to break twice as hard. Because we have to also understand that in order to be able to work that much, we also have to break that much to make sure that we're able to regenerate, to be able to fight. And I remember I was on vacation a few weeks back, and it was a week vacation. I was kind of like, well, I want to work on this. I got to work on this. I got to work on this. I'm kind of like, no. I just want to take a break. I want to take a break. This is my break. This is my time to just focus on me. And like I said, it was so bad, Daquon, to the point I was just like, it was like, I'm not doing anything. What if I don't right now, if I don't do this right this second, then what if this is my chance? What if I'm going to miss the chance? What if I'm going to miss the opportunity of a lifetime? What if I would have recorded that video then? Would it have popped off then? Or if I did this right this here, would this have been the moment that I would have figured out this plot point or whatever the fuck? And it's kind of like, it's this idea of this constant voice, this inner saboteur in your head, that is always fighting you to say, you're not good enough. You have to work hard. You have to keep working hard. And it comes from that trauma that has just been years and years of Black people understanding that in the white world that we live in, we are not good enough. In the white world that we live in, our work is not good enough. Our work is piss poor in their eyes. But we know that it's good. We know that we're working hard. But unfortunately, because of the white supremacy that we live in this society, it only further perpetuates the trauma by always telling us that while we still don't have Black superheroes in the forefront often. Now we're doing a little bit better now, but it's still not as good as it can be. You know, that we don't have Black stories that are not always trauma filled, because that seems to be the only thing that is valuable in white society is Black suffering. And it frustrates me because it further perpetuates that trauma. It keeps re-traumatizing us. Every time we see another slave movie, it re-traumatizes us. It reminds us, and once again, we should never forget atrocities. We should never forget atrocities. But I don't know about you, Daquon, but I haven't seen half as many Holocaust films as I have seen slave films.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I can name maybe a couple of movies about the Holocaust. We're not consistently re-upping that every year. Like, let's talk about it again. Let's talk about it again. It's kind of like, it's an atrocity, and we should never forget it, ever forget it. But to keep bringing it up every single time, every 5 or so years or so, it re-traumatizes the new generation against people. It re-traumatizes that internal fear of German people for Jewish people. It re-traumatizes Black people. Every time I can't tell you, Daquon, every time I see a Black slave movie, how for like the week after I've seen it, I'm like, fuck all white people. Like, I mean.
Listen, there are certain movies that I know I cannot watch unless I'm just by myself for the next week. But I wanted to get to, that point of like this re-traumatization, because I think if you look at it like almost like a trigger, like as we talk about things like PTSD, people have triggers that like bring back that traumatic experience. And Dr. Joy DeGury talks about a post-traumatic slave syndrome, which she defines as a theory that explains the etiology of many of the adaptive survival behaviors in African American communities through the United States and the diaspora. And she calls it a condition that exists as a consequence of multi-generational oppression of Africans and their descendants, resulting in centuries of chattel slavery. And like the key behavioral patterns that she notes are vacant esteem. So kind of getting back to that, imposter syndrome, or this hopelessness that, we can't perform as well as other people, a marked propensity for anger and violence, and racial socialization, or this internalized racism. So I wanted to bring that up because I think that it's one of those things that like we have to think about. What are the things that are re-traumatizing us? What are things that are triggering PTSS? And I was wondering if you've ever seen some of these like key behavioral patterns coming up in your life or the lives of people around you.
Absolutely. I mean, look at any acceptance speech by Black creators, and in most Black people in fields that are white dominated. I mean, you see this, like you said before, this vacant expression. Was it again? Was that what it's called?
vacant
Vacant esteem, right? Yeah, this idea that we are not good enough, that our stories are not good enough, because like I said, it seems in our society that we only value Black stories when it's Black suffering. And that's the only time that we see the most popular movies are oftentimes the movies with the most Black suffering in them. And even when they do break into mainstream, or they break into the diaspora of our mainstream society, it's always Black suffering. If not complete, there's very seldom where it's not. And I think that in that situation, especially in my life too, like it's this idea of like realizing that, or feeling like my stories that I want to tell, the stuff that I want to do is devalued in the grand scheme. Watching white creators do half as much and get twice as much support. Seeing other Black creators speaking about how they're putting out amazing work and they're doing this, and you can see that they're putting in passion and focus and work in there, and this white person comes in, does half of what they're doing, and they get twice the support, whereas that Black creator gets half the support, we're doing twice the work. And it's this idea that they're like, we don't feel like people are seeing us, and that feeling of not being seen perpetuates the idea that we do not exist, that we are esteemed less, that we have nothing to offer, even though our society steals from Black culture consistently. I mean, specifically, let's talk about the cultural appropriation onto vacant esteem, where it's this idea that they can just take from us and act as if we didn't offer that, we didn't bring that to the table, as if cornrows did not exist. When white girls get the style, it's called a tribal this, or called whatever the fuck it's called, and it's kind of like, no, baby, it's called cornrows. But you are devaluing Black contribution to society, which further perpetuates the idea that we do not matter, that we do not offer anything. And it further gives us this idea that when we do bring up the problems in it, when we do bring up how we feel, it's always, you're doing too much, calm down, it's not that much, it's not really your culture, it's American culture. Hip-hop is not Black, it's American. Cornrows are not Black, it's American. And it's that consistent devaluation that, like you said before, triggers that PTSS.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think it's one of those things that I always think it's super important to think about the history and context that, actions or behaviors come from. I think about like this myth or stereotype of like absentee Black fathers or something like that. And, you kind of have to think about it in such of like slavery, where literally people were getting ripped from their families. So it's one of those things that like you couldn't have a close connection with your family, with your children, because at the drop of the dime, they can be taken away with you. And even still, with the prison industrial complex and police brutality, at the drop of a dime, some of your Black family members can be gone. And it's one of those things that I think context is so important, because it provides an explanation, not necessarily an excuse, like we always said. But it also provides us a way of thinking that helps us broaden the picture out and understand that this is not like something that is just happening because it's just it just happens, but there are certain things that trigger this, or certain ideas that have like long histories behind that. And I also want to bring up that like this is not just something that is social, it is also physical. Like, have you ever heard of epigenetics? So epigenetics is like this study of like how the environmental influences kind of literally get under our skin, directing transcriptional activity and influence the expression and suppression of genes. So, for example, a study was done by molecular biologists in Spain and found that the effects of trauma can be felt 14 generations later. We're not that far from slavery, but 14 generations later, these traumas can still be felt. And it's one of the explanations that some scientists have as to why things like high blood pressure and heart disease and all of these stress related illnesses are so common in the Black community, is because of the acute stress that Black people face because of racism and the histories behind that. And it's literally getting encoded in our DNA.
That is insane. Like, that is crazy. So are they saying that, like, even after all of the generations, like, the leftover feelings of that is still exists in us? Is that what it's saying?
Yeah, like there was also another study done on, I think it was like monkeys or something like that. And, they do this test to like invoke anxiety of a monkey using some type of like stimulant. So like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, if they touch a banana, they'll get like shocked or something like that. Um, and even when that stimulus is taken away, even if they're not necessarily getting shocked, like they're next generation still have like this fear and anxiety if they ever see that.
Hesitation.
Yeah.
That, and honestly, I have to say, now that you bring up that, I fully have had experiences like going to a plantation. Like, I work at a library that was a house that has a slave quarter right next to the house or whatever, and it's not torn down, it's still there. And every time I pass by it, I just feel this anxiety. Every time I walk in that house, I just feel this feeling of like, I don't belong here. Like, this is a bad energy. And it's kind of like, once again, the people are nice, everything's nice, and everything's renovated and different, but there's just this feeling inside of me every time. It's just like, it's like almost I can't breathe. You know what I mean?
Right.
And
Yeah.
I can never feel comfortable there. Like, I'm always anxious when I'm at that particular library, because I feel like this is a place of pain.
Yeah.
And even though I didn't feel it myself, that pain is still, it feels like you said, it's not as prevalent, it's not as, intense as if I was there when it happened, but there's these echoes in your energy, there's these echoes in your body, this epigenetics that lets you know this is bad. That it's this fear of like, when I walked into the house, I felt like I didn't belong, because Black people back in that time you didn't go into the house unless you were given permission to by the master, if you were a house slave. But it felt like I didn't belong there. It was just like you said, this hesitation of like, should I even be in here? And I think that when you brought up the epigenetics thing, I think it's the fear of like knowing that back in the day, my ancestors knew better than to walk in if you were a certain shade or a certain complexion, and you knew you could not come in unless you had permission from whoever the fuck. And it's crazy that you bring that up, because I'm like, I never really understood why I had that hesitation in me. I mean, have you ever experienced something like that with epigenetics, like in that sense?
Yeah, like kind of similar to your story. I remember in high school, like I think this was ninth or 10th grade, um, the history teacher had a field trip to a slave cabin, and we slept in a slave cabin overnight. This was something that was like, it wasn't even super far from my house, like literally driving distance to the slave cabin. And it was one of the weirdest experiences I've ever had. Like, it's one of those things where it's just like, I didn't know, I did not have any language to really describe how I felt, but it was like something felt off. Something was just like, there's just this, there's some type of something happening, especially considering like my history, like the two history teachers that was leading the trip were white. And it was just like,
I was about to ask you that. I was just about to ask you that. Keep going. I'm sorry.
right, no, you're good. So like me looking back, I'm like, something seems a little off.
Daquon, please tell me that this was a Black class.
I would like this. My high school was majority Black. So it was. I think on the trip it was mainly Black students and like maybe one or two white people.
And they I just, oh my God.
We
I'm
slept in
sorry.
a slave cabin.
Y'all, I'm laughing right now because of how uncomfortable I am right now. They fully let y'all sleep in the cabin like this is a fun field trip.
Yeah, it was one of those things that like I remember in the moment, I was like, I don't know how I feel about this, but I wanted to do it because the history teacher for the next grade was also on the field trip. And I was like, oh, I want to like get on that person's good side. But then now I'm just like, I'm really just like out here
Sleeping
trying
in
to
a
get on
slave
that good
cabin.
side to sleep in the slave cabin. And I'm like, mm-mm. Me now, me with the more radical rhetoric that I have now could not be me.
I want to bring this up, and Jill Scott brought this up, and I thought this is an amazing quotation that she said. And she just talked about, I'm going to paraphrase here, but she was talking about how people do like renovating the slave cabins and renovating plantation homes, and they're like, oh yes, like it's a bed and breakfast now. You can stay in the slave. We've renovated, and we've
For
changed it.
weddings.
Yeah, for weddings and such. And she brought this thing. And once again, I want to clarify that I do not compare tragedies or atrocities. All atrocities are bad regardless. We're not comparing, we're not saying one was worse than the other, whatever. Atrocities are atrocities, period. But I wanted to say that she brought up, she was like, y'all are saying that y'all want to stay in these renovated slave cabins, but y'all wouldn't renovate Auschwitz. Y'all wouldn't turn that into a hotel and bed and breakfast. And the tragedy that Black people experienced in slavery, the atrocities that we experienced at the hands of white people throughout years, stuff that we don't even know about fully either, because not everything was tracked. But the atrocities that we experienced, the fact that you are, what is it, communizing it? What was I looking for? Like making it money, commodifying it. The fact that you're commodifying tragedy to benefit white dollars. It's the audacity.
I'm sorry, if one of my friends ever had a plantation wedding, I'd be like, A, I'm not going to be here. B, don't call me ever again.
ever again. Like, and it just, like I said before, it's just crazy to me how people don't understand how bad this really is. Like the fact that somebody in the administration was like, oh yeah, having these Black kids sleep in a slave cabin, great. That's the literal equivalent of going, hey, let's let all these Jewish people sleep in the bunks that the people slept in the Auschwitz and let them re-experience the pain. Like, it's just, I'm telling the reason I'm laughing because I'm just so, I am so in shock that even occurred. I mean, there was even a story about a guy who said that his white teacher took the, I don't know if you read about this story too, but his white teacher took the Black class to go pick cotton. Do you remember that story?
Yes.
And like his mom was like, where'd you get raw cotton from? Like, how did you get like raw unprocessed cotton? He's like, yeah, my teacher took me to a cotton, and his mom rightfully cussed that bitch out. But it's like, it's crazy to me because it's kind of like, in what world does commodifying or making light of trauma, like that's, once again, it's the equivalent of trying to say, let's take these Jewish people and put them in a gas chamber and be like, hey, let's just let you sit in here and just, isn't it scary? Oh, like, you know what I mean? Like, that's not okay. That's not okay. It's not okay. And like I said, again, I want to clarify, not comparing atrocities. Not comparing atrocities, because there is no such thing. Atrocities are atrocities regardless. Nobody had it worse, nobody had it better. All of these are bad. But what I am saying is that the equivalencies of the trauma that we experienced as Black people in our history, the fact that they have become commodified and commercialized as something to be, aspired to, like, oh, sleep here and remember what it was like to be a slave. Like, I'm sorry, what? Like, let's pick cotton like you all, like your ancestors did in the and not that long ago. Let's re-experience this. What is it called? Let's reignite that trauma that's suppressing. Let's reignite those epigenetics that are teaching you this is a bad thing, that this happened. So what do you think, Daquon? Am I coming off correct when I'm saying this?
I agree with you. I think it's one of those things that, like, for example, I wouldn't have a problem with, going on a field trip to a plantation that was like a museum and you were like doing something that's like, I don't even know how to describe
Honoring.
it, but something that like remembers in a way that's not just like, oh, let's like have fun, like it'll be a good, like,
Yeah.
no, it's just like, we're going
Reverence.
here, atrocities happen here, we're not trying to hide it, we're not trying to downplay it at all. Like, that is an educational moment. But like, taking your students to pick cotton, I'm sorry, that I don't know who approved that, but whoever approved that, they need to have some words.
And that goes back to devaluing the trauma that African Americans have experienced in slavery and still experience today with racism and white supremacy. When you renovate a slave quarter, or when you say, oh, let's visit a plantation to just, let's pick cotton, and remember that when you do that stuff, you are devaluing the pain and trauma that Black people experience. That's what you're doing. That's what you're doing.
Not only that, but you're also erasing that history.
Exactly. And that's why I say that in the situation with Auschwitz and the Holocaust or whatever, it's like we hold reverence to the people's lives that were lost. We hold reverence to the fact that this is a atrocity that happened in our history. We hold reverence to the people whose families were lost during the Holocaust. And I believe that that same reverence should be held when it comes to African American people whose families were torn apart because of slavery, whose entire plantations were built on the backs of Black bodies. Lives lost, blood spilled of all of the people of our kin in our history. And no, we did not experience slavery ourselves, but we still feel the effects of that pain decades later. Because let's not forget that slavery was not that long ago. It was not hundreds of thousands of years ago. And I just think that, it hurts my feelings, and it brings me pain to think that people just want to, like you said before, erase the trauma that we've experienced. People want to devalue our trauma as if it does not still affect us. Once again, people who are Jewish have not, the people now that are, there are still people who have, there were still, what I don't understand, Daquon, is that there are still people who have experienced these things. There are still people who have lived through the Holocaust. You see what I'm saying? There are still people who are alive who've experienced seeing lynchings. You know what I'm saying? These people are still alive. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's like the fact that we have basically, like I said before, Jewish people, I'm sure have, like the people now have not experienced the Holocaust, but they still feel the trauma and pain that their ancestors went through. And it pisses me off that we are living in a society where we're not holding reverence and holding respect to all the things that were taken from marginalized people. And this doesn't just include Black people, but it includes Asian people and Native American people, that we still pretend like the fuck this land was not stolen from Native Americans. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We're still not erasing, we're still not holding reverence to the fact that, or respect to the fact that Asian Americans were put in concentration camps in America because they were Asian. I think it was Japanese, right?
Right.
If I'm not mistaken.
Internment camps.
Internment camps. So it's like, the fact that we as a society are so adamant about being like, it didn't happen, sweep it under the rug, it didn't happen, it was the past. And devaluing people's trauma, it pisses me off.
And we treat it like the past when it's not that far in the past. Like, you have to realize, sure, slavery started about 400 years ago. That's still not that long ago. And you still have to remember all of the echoes of slavery. You have to think about sharecropping. You have to think about segregation in the
Jim Crow. What's that? Bitch, we here with it.
We're here. like I said in one of the previous episodes, like, my dad was a part of like integrating his school. Like, that we're not that separated. Even today, how we face all types of heightened brutality, police brutality, prison industrial complex. When we talk about the amendment that got rid of slavery, It says we're getting rid of slavery unless, as a punishment for a crime. Like, it's one of those things that we still feel. All of these things are still happening, and we are still feeling the effects of things that happened in the past.
And that's the thing that people understand, that this, like you said, that PTSS, like this stuff still exists. We are still, we as Black people are still trying to repair. We're still trying to rebuild. We're still trying to break these generational curses, which is generational trauma that have been ingrained in us for years, teaching our Black youth that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay not to always bring home an A, but it's also okay to take that time to understand and recognize where you went wrong so that you can do better. To celebrate the fact that you are not meaningless because you made a lower grade, or you're not meaningless because you didn't come out of high school with straight A's, because not everybody can do that.
Right.
But you're giving it your best. If you come out with straight C's or straight D's, but you've been giving it your all, and you've been giving it your best, you've been giving it everything you have, that's what matters.
The fact that you got through it speaks volumes, because there's so many barriers and so many obstacles put in place so that you can't get through it.
Baby, that's an episode of the education system. Baby, oh, we're gonna have a discussion about that. Absolutely. But like you said, it's these things that we have experienced, trying to break these chains that have been put on us. Like you said before, slavery did not end. It just commodified. It became the prison industrial complex. That's slavery. It's modern day slavery. And it just frustrates me. If you watch it, there's a documentary on Netflix called The 13th. And it talks about how the prison industrial complex it disproportionately affects people of color more than white people. That a majority of the people in prisons are African-American people with nonviolent crimes. And it's crazy to me that we live in this society and we realize, and when people don't want to talk about, don't want to pay respects to those things and realize what we've done and how things are still problematic to this day, that the reality is racism is rampant. The reality is that trauma is still happening. And Daquon, how do you think that we can move to break these chains of intergenerational trauma? How can we move past this? What do you think we can do?
I think it's one of those things that, like we say a lot of times, reflection is the start. We have to be able to acknowledge what's happening. We have to be able to, make claim to, like, this is what's happening. Not saying that we're not doing that, because people have been talking about these issues for years, decades, centuries even. But it starts with this acknowledgement of what's happening, acknowledging the context that this came out of, acknowledging what are the systems that are in place that are perpetuating it, recognizing the things in our society that are re-triggering this PTSS, and being able to, dismantle oppressive systems and rebuild or build systems that are actually built with care, with caring for communities, with caring for people as human beings.
Absolutely. I think it definitely starts with us. I think that as Black people, we have to recognize that these generational curses are not magic. They're not supernatural. They are real things that affect us, that are just fanciful words. Calling it a generational curse makes it sound like we can't get it broken. Call it what it is. Recognize that this is trauma that has been ingrained in us for centuries. Understanding that this trauma, not even centuries, decades, and then realizing that these 400 years, all this stuff, the Jim Crow era, the segregation era, all these things have lasting effects on us in the present day. And first things first, we have to recognize that pain, understand how that pain affects us now, understand how it makes us react to things now, understanding how it affects us now, moving to heal from it. Because like I said before, my mom may have raised me with those kind of ideals about, making sure I make a good grades or whatever, but it was different than how she was raised. It was better than how she was raised. And I don't think she fully understands that in a way, she has stopped some piece of that trauma from flowing through again. Each time, each generation, we are, and that's what I say, I want to give credit to the Black community where we give credit where credit is due, because a lot of times we are trying to break free. It's hard, it's slow, and it can be a little bit better if we focus on it, but we are slowly letting some of those things go. Like I said, my mom, even though she, as a younger kid, like I said before, she wasn't as very open to that now, but as an adult, my mom is very open to understanding where she might have gone wrong, what she said done. My mom has apologized to me for how she may have done things a little bit differently, trying to make me strong, trying to make me whatever. And I realized that, and I asked her, like, Mom, did you ever get apology by your mom? She's like, no, it never had like a I'm sorry moment or like this moment that we're having here. And I'm kind of like, that is breaking those chains. Because you're saying that I'm not going to allow my child to go through life never knowing or never understanding that I apologized or that I wasn't the perfect parent, and recognizing that I wasn't always right, and showing that vulnerability, so that now if I would ever have kids, or if I would have somebody else, I know that I can say I'm sorry and it doesn't make me weak, because my mom said she was sorry to me, even though her mom didn't. Do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
That is how we move forward, understanding the community, understanding that in order for us to break these chains that have bogged us down and has torn us down for so many years, it starts first with us in healing, in fighting back against white supremacy, in fighting and being activists, and recognizing and making sure that we understand, and making sure that people know we are not going to stand for this anymore. You are not going to pigeonhole our stories to trauma, because that is not all the stories that we have. We are not going to only showcase trauma-filled movies and films and stuff like that, because there is more to Black history. There's more to Black experience. There's more to Black creativity than trauma and pain and suffering. We have more to offer. And as Black people, we need to showcase that we can bring those things to the table, that there can be shows with strong Black leads who have their fathers. There can be strong Black shows that have nothing to do with drugs and nothing to do with suffering and nothing to do with not being scraping to get by. These are valid stories, but there are other stories that we can tell. And that's how we do it, by understanding, all right, we can tell another story now. It's okay to tell another story, and not allowing them to perpetuate these slave films over and over and over and over again when they want a quick buck. Bitch, what you're not going to do is commodify my pain.
And that's on what?
Period. So, Daquon, do you want to add anything else when we get to our second segment of this week?
I'll just add, if you're listening at this point of the video, do something for healing today.
Period. Do something for healing. What do you suggest? What do you think?
It really depends on who you are as a person. Sometimes healing can be just journaling, just taking time to be with your thoughts, be with your emotions, acknowledge them. Healing can be meditation, clearing your mind, or I wouldn't even say clearing your mind, because your thoughts are always going to be there, but taking time to check in with yourself and, focus on manifesting what you believe in, focus on thinking about your dreams, focusing on thinking about what you can achieve. Take time to realize your potential. Take time to focus on your craft, what you're good at, your skills, your strengths. Take time to achieve whatever you need to achieve. Take time for rest. Take a break.
Absolutely. So many little boys and girls grow up never knowing the full scope of what their culture has contributed to society and history. So it's time for a change. Let's take a pause, rewind, and remind the world just how we did that. So in an article, Little Known Black History Facts by PBS, we learned that the earliest recorded protest against slavery was by the Quakers in 1688. Now, Quakers, also known as the Society of Friends, have a long history of abolition, but it was 4 Pennsylvania Friends from Germantown who wrote the initial protest in the 17th century. They saw the slave trade as a grave injustice against their fellow man and used the golden rule to argue against such inhumane treatment. Regardless of skin color, we should do unto others as we done unto ourselves. In their protest, they stated, pray, what thing in the world can be done worse towards us than if men should rob or steal us away and steal us for slaves to strange countries, separating husband from their wives and children. Their protest against slavery and human trafficking was presented at monthly meeting in Dublin, in Philadelphia. The Dublin monthly meeting reviewed the protest, but sent it to the quarterly meeting, feeling it too serious an issue for their own meeting to decide. The 4 friends continued their efforts and presented at the Philadelphia yearly meeting, but it wasn't until 88 years later that the Society of Friends officially denounced slavery. Over the centuries, this rare document has been considered lost twice. Most recently, it was rediscovered in 2005 and is now at the Haverford College of Special Collections.
Yeah.
And that is that particular protest and that particular conversation also talks about allyship and understanding that, you know, we need voices from all ways, from everywhere, to help record and discuss the atrocities and the pains of people of color.
Yeah, that's powerful. Thank you for sharing that with us. And for my we did that, I'm, on this topic of like breaking down chains, breaking down barriers, and just like achieving your potential. Dr. Rebecca Lee Crumpler was somebody who challenged the prejudice and that prevented African Americans from pursuing careers in medicine. And Dr. Crumpler became the first African American woman in the United States to earn an MD degree. In 1860, she was admitted to the New England Female Medical College. When she graduated in 1864, Crumpler was the first African American woman in the United States to earn an MD degree and the only African American woman to graduate from the New England Female Medical College, which closed in 1873. Dr. Crumpler practiced in Boston for a short while before moving to Richmond, Virginia after the Civil War ended in 1865. In Richmond, she felt it would be a proper field for real missionary work and one that would present ample opportunities to be acquainted with the diseases of women and children. During her stay, she quotes that nearly every hour was improved in that sphere of labor, and that last quarter of the year in 1866, she was enabled to have access every day to a very large number of indigenous and other of different classes in a population of 30,000 colored. She joined other Black physicians caring for freed slaves who would otherwise have no access to medical care, working with the Freedmen's Bureau and missionary and community groups, even though Black physicians experienced intense racism working in the post-war South. Now there's no photos or other images that survive of Dr. Crumpler. The little we know about her comes from the introduction to her book, a remarkable mark of her achievements as a physician and medical writer in a time when very few African Americans were able to gain admittance to medical colleges, let alone publish. Her book was one of the very first medical publications by an African American.
That's amazing. It's always good to hear. And I wanted to really touch on that part about the Quakers that I brought up earlier with my We Did That real quick. I just want to kind of touch on that. The reason why I brought that one up was because I wanted to discuss active allyship and understanding that, you know, if you're going to be an ally of a community that you're not a part of, it's not just enough to say that's wrong. And these Quakers actively protested against slavery, and they were not slaves themselves, you know? And they recognized the injustice, just as we recognize the injustice of our fellow Asian brothers and sisters in this movement that is going on now, in recognizing that even though I'm not Asian American, and even though I do not have that experience and I can't call to that experience, active allyship is about denouncing those treacherous activities, that discuss those disgusting atrocities against people, because it is treacherous against our fellow man and our fellow cultures that have been marginalized, to have them taken advantage of and killed and murdered and discriminated against simply because of who they are. You know, as Black people, we have a responsibility to stand with them. As people of color, we have a responsibility to stand against white supremacy as a whole. And I think that when it comes to, you know, this anti-Asian discrimination, this anti-Asian rhetoric that we're hearing, the China virus and the Kung flu, that's why I want to bring it back to this real quick, is that in our communities and in our situations, we have to recognize when we are using problematic language, especially now, how dangerous it is, and understanding that it is treacherous to our own goals as Black people to further perpetuate such discrimination against those people, because of the fact that we understand what it's like to be marginalized. We understand what it's like to be killed simply for being a person of color. Yeah. And that's what I wanted to leave with. I didn't mean to disorient from what we were talking about just now. I just wanted to kind of take a break. I really want us to leave with that note. You know, support Asian businesses, support Asian people, you know, support in this time is what is necessary. And we leave you today knowing that we celebrate our culture, especially as African Americans. And we did that segment is to celebrate our culture. But in this particular this particular episode, we want to make sure that you are left with knowing that, you know, a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Just as Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So please hashtag Asian Lives Matter. Please hashtag that it will not be tolerated anymore. Please put on your Instagrams, your Facebooks, and your Twitters that this is not okay.
Right. You know, make it known to stop Asian hate. That's a popular hashtag that's going around.
Hashtag stop Asian hate.
Make sure that, you know, as we are fighting for marginalized voices within our community, we can't do that by stepping on the backs and pushing others down. You know, if we're all trying to climb up a ladder and we're knocking somebody else down, we're just going to be stuck in this perpetual state. That is what white supremacy was created to do. It was created to put whiteness at the top and everybody else climbing, struggling, trying to get there, so that we are putting down our own communities, putting down other marginalized people, just so whiteness can still be at the top. Like,
absolutely.
Fight against white supremacy requires all people.
Absolutely. And like I said, that was a really great story about Rebecca. I really appreciate you bringing that to us today, Daquon. So as we've always said, guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. We are available as a podcast, a Melanin Margin, on Spotify, everywhere you can find podcasts, or wherever they're available. Please rate and review. And as always, please keep the conversation going down in the comment blocks below. We do read, we do respond. We do want to hear what you guys say. We hear what you guys want to say, what you want to talk about, which if you want to discuss anything that we've discussed in this episode, please let us know. Don't forget to follow me at Andre Talks a Lot and Daquon at Daquon950. We will see you guys next week. And as always, thank you so much for watching.